I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or the supernatural. I mean, I enjoy a good horror movie as much as the next person, but I always sleep soundly afterward. To me, flickering lights are faulty wiring, and strange noises are just the building settling. There's always a logical explanation. Always. But I'm telling you this now because I need someone to know what happened in that third-floor apartment, and the logical explanation is somehow 1,000 times more terrifying than any ghost story could ever be. It all started about 2 months after my grandma Rose passed away. Her death was sudden, one of those awful, pointless accidents that leaves a hole in your world so big you can't see the other side. She was my person. After I graduated college, with no real plan and a mountain of student debt, she was the one who helped me find my footing. She co-signed the lease on my first apartment. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom on the third floor of a pre-war building in a quiet, leafy part of the city. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned in the winter, but it had good light and tall ceilings. More importantly, it was mine. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place where I could finally start building a life on my own terms, away from all the sadness. I spent the first few weeks just getting settled, arranging the second-hand furniture I'd painstakingly collected, hanging pictures, trying to make the space feel less like a rental and more like a home. There was a sort of healing in the routine of it all. Making coffee in the morning, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up, putting my keys in the little ceramic bowl by the door. It was peaceful. I was starting to feel okay. Then came the box. It was a Saturday, the kind of lazy, gray afternoon in late autumn where the only thing on the agenda is a bottomless cup of tea and a good book. I'd decided it was finally time to go through the last box of things Grandma Rose's lawyer had sent over. It was a simple cardboard box, sealed with packing tape, with "Anne's keepsakes" written on the side in my grandma's familiar, loopy handwriting. I'd been putting it off. The finality of it felt too heavy. I sat on the floor of my living room, the worn oriental rug that had been hers soft beneath me, and sliced the tape open with a kitchen knife. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was her smell, a faint, comforting mix of lavender sachets and old, dry paper. It was so potent, so real, that I had to close my eyes for a second. I could almost feel her in the room with me. The top layer was her favorite cashmere shawl, a soft gray thing she wore constantly. I pulled it out and wrapped it around my shoulders. It still held her scent. Underneath were photo albums, their pages yellowed and brittle. There were pictures of my mom as a kid with scraped knees, pictures of my grandpa, who I never met, looking handsome in his army uniform, and pictures of me as a gap-toothed kid on grandma's lap. I spent a long time just tracing their smiling faces with my finger, a dull, familiar ache settling in my chest. It was a sad, sweet kind of pain, the kind you can live with. I was getting lost in the memories, the quiet of the apartment wrapping around me like a blanket. I got up to check the fridge for a snack, saw the empty milk carton, and sighed. Out loud, to no one, just a thought-given voice in the empty room, I mumbled, "Damn, forgot to buy milk again." It was nothing, a completely insignificant moment in a day of insignificant moments. I shuffled back to the box. I dug deeper, past piles of old birthday cards and pressed flowers. Right at the very bottom, nestled in a corner and wrapped in tissue paper, was something hard and rectangular. I unwrapped it. It was a phone, not a smartphone, an old one. One of those sturdy, brick-like Nokia phones from the early 2000s, with a tiny monochrome screen and rubbery buttons. It looked ancient. I couldn't imagine my grandma using this. She'd had a simple flip phone for years, but this thing was a dinosaur. Curiosity got the better of me. The back was a little loose, but the battery was still inside. My current phone charger was obviously useless, but I have this weird habit of never throwing out old cables. After a few minutes of rummaging through a junk drawer, I actually found an old micro USB charger that fit. I plugged it in, half expecting nothing to happen. But after a moment, the tiny screen flickered to life with a familiar, pixelated animation of two hands connecting. A wave of strange, electronic nostalgia washed over me. The battery icon was blinking, but it was charging. It worked. I let it charge for about an hour, my mind buzzing with questions. Why did she have this? Was it an old one she just never threw away? After a while, I unplugged it and sat back down on the rug. The phone felt heavy and solid in my hand. I powered it on. The screen lit up, a pale green glow. I navigated the simple menu, the clicks of the buttons loud in the quiet room. I went to the contacts. And that's when the first prickle of unease started, right at the base of my neck. The contact list wasn't empty, but it wasn't full, either. There was only one entry, a single saved number under a single, bizarre name. Me. Just that. M-E. I stared at it for a long time. Me. What did that mean? My first thought was that maybe it was a weird default setting or a joke. But it was a number, a full 10-digit phone number with a local area code. Maybe Grandma had bought it for herself and, in a moment of age-addled confusion, had saved her own number under that name. It seemed plausible. She'd been getting a little more forgetful toward the end. Still, it felt off. A weird impulse took hold of me. I don't know why I did it. It was part curiosity, part a strange desire to connect with some forgotten piece of her life. I didn't want to use the old phone itself. It probably didn't even have service. So, I grabbed my own phone, my sleek, modern iPhone, and carefully typed in the 10-digit number from the Nokia screen. My thumb hovered over the green call icon for a second. It felt silly, almost like I was being a nosy kid. What was I expecting? A disconnected number message? A confused old lady on the other end who had inherited my grandma's old number? I shrugged and pressed the button. I put my iPhone to my ear. The line connected almost instantly. No ringing, just a click, and then silence. Not static, not the hollow sound of an open, empty line. It was a dense, heavy silence, the kind that makes you instinctively hold your breath because you feel like someone is listening on the other end. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding small. "Nothing." "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked again, a little louder this time. More silence. I was about to hang up, chalking it up to a dead line or a technical glitch. I figured I'd wasted enough time on this weird little mystery. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my thumb already moving to end the call. And then, a voice came through the speaker. It was a sound that made every muscle in my body lock up. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a recording of my grandma. It was a voice I knew better than any other in the world. It was clear and perfectly audible, as if the person was in the room right next to me. It was my voice, and it said, with the exact same sigh of tired annoyance I'd used just an hour earlier, "Damn, forgot to buy milk again." The words echoed in the tiny speaker, a perfect, high-fidelity recording of my private, throwaway comment. For a split second, my brain refused to process it. It was like seeing something that defied physics. It just wasn't possible. It had to be a coincidence. A crossed line, an echo from my own phone. But it wasn't an echo. The sound quality was too clean, the delivery too precise. It was a playback. My fingers went numb. My iPhone slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The call was still connected, but there was only silence again from the other side. The absolute, total silence of my apartment suddenly felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful. The cozy, safe space I had built for myself was gone, and in its place was a cold, horrible realization that I wasn't, and perhaps had never been, alone. I sat on the floor for what felt like an hour, staring at my phone lying screen up on the hardwood. The call had ended when I dropped it, but the silence it left behind was enormous. It filled the entire apartment, pressing in on me from the corners of the room. It was the kind of silence that has weight. Out on the street, a car alarm started blaring, a sudden, jagged tear in the quiet, and I jumped so hard my teeth clicked together. My first thought, my brain's desperate, frantic attempt to build a wall against the terror, was that it had to be a technical glitch. A horribly timed, astronomically unlikely glitch. Maybe, I thought, maybe when I made the call, my iPhone's microphone had somehow created a feedback loop, recording my own words spoken an hour earlier and playing them back to me. It didn't make any sense. The technology doesn't work that way. But the alternative, that someone, somewhere, had a recording of me in my own apartment and decided to play it back at the exact moment I called. That was impossible. That was movie stuff. That didn't happen in a third-floor walk-up in a quiet neighborhood. I crawled over to my phone, my knees protesting on the old wood. My hands were shaking. I picked it up. The screen was cold. I immediately went to my recent calls list. There it was, an outgoing call to the number from the old Nokia. Duration, 58 seconds. My next thought went to the old phone. The brick, the source of this whole thing. It was still sitting on the rug, looking ancient and harmless. But it didn't feel harmless anymore. It felt like a prop from a nightmare. Maybe, my scrambling mind offered, maybe the phone had some weird, old-school spyware on it. Maybe when I turned it on, it activated something that made it record ambient sound. And when I called its number, it just played back the last thing it recorded. This explanation felt closer to the realm of possibility. It was still bizarre, still deeply unsettling, but it was a technical problem. A technical problem could be solved. You could take the battery out. You could smash it with a hammer. I picked up the Nokia, its plastic casing feeling slick and foreign in my sweaty palm. I didn't want it in my apartment a second longer. I didn't want to look at it. I stood up, walked back over to the cardboard box of Grandma's things, and shoved the phone deep inside, burying it under her cashmere shawl and the photo albums. I resealed the box with the packing tape I'd left on the floor, pressing it down hard, as if sealing a tomb. Out of sight, out of mind. That's what I was hoping for, anyway. But the feeling didn't go away. The quiet came back, and this time it was worse. The apartment didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt exposed. Every little noise, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint groan of the pipes in the wall, a siren in the far-off distance, they all sounded different. They sounded like they were part of a larger, unseen audience. I got up and walked to my front door, my footsteps loud on the floorboards. I checked the deadbolt. It was locked. I checked it again. I slid the chain lock into place, a little piece of metal that suddenly felt ridiculously flimsy. I went to the window in the living room and peered through the blinds, down at the empty, tree-lined street below. The orange glow of the streetlights pooled on the pavement. Nothing, just a peaceful, sleeping street. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was letting a weird tech glitch get into my head. I was still grieving, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That had to be it. What I needed was a dose of normalcy. I needed to hear a friendly voice. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Chloe. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, you," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "You're up late." "Couldn't sleep," I lied, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. I took a deep breath. "Just a weird day." "Oh? Tell me everything. Did you finally finish unpacking that last box?" Her voice was a lifeline. Just hearing her talk about normal things, it was like an anchor in this weird, swirling sea of anxiety. We talked for close to an hour. We talked about her terrible boss, about a new show she was binge-watching, about a guy she'd gone on a date with. It was perfect. It was mundane. It was exactly what I needed. I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. The silence of my apartment became background noise again, not a presence. "So, how was the first full week at the new job?" she asked. I laughed, a real laugh this time. "Oh God, a complete disaster on Friday." "Do tell." "Okay, so you know my new boss, Mr. Davies? The super serious, silver-haired guy who looks like he was born in a suit. I've seen the pictures. Intimidating." "Exactly. So, I was bringing him his afternoon coffee, trying to be all competent and professional, and I was also carrying this huge stack of files he needed. And, I don't know, my ankle just decided to stop working. I completely ate it, Chloe. Right in front of his desk. Like, full-on, spaghetti legs, papers everywhere. The coffee went flying. I think some of it got on his pants." Chloe burst out laughing on the other end of the line. "No, no, yes. It was mortifying. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. He was actually pretty nice about it, but I'm pretty sure I'm now the clumsy girl for the rest of my tenure there." We talked for a few more minutes, and by the time we hung up, I felt almost normal again. The incident with the phone felt distant, like a weird dream I was already starting to forget. It was just a glitch. A fluke. I was safe. I was just tired and stressed. I went through my nighttime routine. I washed my face, brushed my teeth, changed into an old t-shirt. I felt the comforting weight of exhaustion finally settling over me. I climbed into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. The city was quiet now. I pulled the covers up to my chin, took one last look around my cozy, dimly lit bedroom, and closed my eyes. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could actually breathe. And then my phone rang. It wasn't my usual ringtone. It was the shrill, default blare that meant the call was coming from an unknown number. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was almost midnight. Who would be calling me from a blocked number? My mom? A work emergency? My hand trembled as I reached for the phone on my nightstand. The screen just said, "No caller ID." A cold dread, far worse than anything I'd felt before, washed over me. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer, to just throw the phone across the room. But what if it was important? I swiped to answer, my thumb feeling clumsy and numb. I didn't say anything. I just lifted the phone to my ear and held my breath. Silence. The same heavy, loaded silence from before. A deep, listening silence that felt like a physical presence in the room. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. My throat was so tight I couldn't have spoken if I wanted to. Then a voice came through the speaker. It was a voice that was both intimately familiar and monstrously alien. It was perfectly clear, as if it was being whispered right into the microphone. It was my voice, and it said, with the exact same tone of embarrassed humor I had used with Chloe, "I completely ate it, Chloe." Like, full on, spaghetti legs, papers everywhere. The world stopped. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a feedback loop. It wasn't a weird old phone. The audio was pristine, crystal clear. It was a perfect recording of a private conversation I had less than an hour ago. The casual intimacy of the words, my own private, embarrassing story, being played back to me by an anonymous stranger was a violation so profound I felt it in my bones. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped somewhere in my lungs. I ripped the phone away from my ear and flung it onto the bed, scrambling backwards until my back hit the cold wall. I stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. The call was still connected. A little green bar at the top of the screen pulsed silently. He was still there, listening. My mind was a white-hot storm of panic. Someone was listening to my calls. Not just the call to the weird number. All of them. My private conversation with my best friend. My secrets. My life. The cozy, safe space I had so carefully built, my sanctuary from the world, was gone. It had never been real. It was a stage. It was a glass cage. And someone had been watching me the entire time. I wasn't alone in my apartment. And I had the sickening, horrifying feeling that I hadn't been for a very, very long time. My breath was gone. It felt like my lungs had collapsed, turned into two solid, useless knots in my chest. I was a statue, my back pressed so hard against the dry wall I thought I might phase through it. The phone lay on my comforter, a small, black rectangle of pure malevolence. The green bar at the top of the screen was a sickly, pulsing beacon in the dim light of my bedroom, a digital heartbeat for the monster on the other end of the line. He was there. He was still connected. He was listening to the roaring silence, listening to the frantic, silent scream that was my entire existence at that moment. The first coherent thought that broke through the white noise of my panic was not about who he was or why he was doing this. It was a single, primal command from the deepest part of my brain: cut the cord. I launched myself off the wall, a clumsy, jerky movement. I didn't care about being quiet. I snatched the phone off the bed. My thumb was slick with sweat, and it took 2 tries to slide the red end call icon across the screen. The green bar vanished. For a split second, I felt a flicker of control, of victory. It was a stupid, foolish feeling. He had already won this round. He had proven his point. But my body was still moving, running on a script I wasn't consciously writing. The phone in my hand was a source of poison. I held it at arm's length, went to my desk, and pressed the power button down, holding it until the screen went dark. It wasn't enough. It felt like just putting a monster to sleep. I fumbled with the back casing, my nails scrabbling at the tiny seam. It came off with a crack. I dug the battery out and threw it on my rug. I threw the phone's hollow shell after it. Disconnected, deactivated, dead. Next, the internet. My mind was racing. He'd recorded a phone call. That meant, I didn't know what that meant. Could he be listening through the Wi-Fi? Through my laptop? I didn't understand the technology, and that ignorance was a new kind of terror. Anything seemed possible, so I had to assume the worst. I ran into the living room, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood floor. The little blinking lights on the router on my bookshelf suddenly looked like a dozen tiny, winking eyes. I didn't bother with the power button. I yanked the power cord straight out of the wall socket. The lights died instantly. Then I found the Ethernet cable, the thick blue snake that fed the signal into the router, and I ripped that out of the wall jack too, with a satisfying, plastic crunch. The apartment was now an island. No calls in or out. No internet. I was completely and utterly isolated. And somehow, that felt safer. I stood in the middle of the living room, panting, my heart banging against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence was different now. Before, it had been a listening silence. Now, it was a dead silence. The faint, almost subliminal hum of the refrigerator, the blinking clock on the microwave, the low buzz of the Wi-Fi router. All the tiny, electronic whispers of a modern apartment were gone. The only sound in the entire world was the ragged gasp of my own breathing and the frantic drumming of blood in my ears. The apartment, my home, my sanctuary, felt alien. It was just a box on the third floor, a box he could apparently reach into and touch whenever he wanted. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner seemed to harbor something I couldn't see. The familiar shape of my armchair looked like a hunched figure in the darkness. The coat rack by the door looked like a tall, thin man standing perfectly still. My imagination was on fire, painting monsters over all my familiar things. Chloe, God, Chloe, my call with her had been the bait. He had used her voice, her friendship, my own vulnerability against me. Had he been listening the whole time? Had he heard me talk about my grandmother? About my new job? The thought was a physical violation, a slug of ice sliding down my spine. The mortifying story about spilling coffee on my boss was now evidence in the hands of a madman. I needed to see. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming urge to look outside. To see the normal world. To see sleeping cars and dark windows and peaceful, empty streets. To prove to myself that the horror was confined to these four walls and the wires I had just ripped out. It was a stupid impulse. The last thing a hunted animal should do is reveal itself. But I wasn't thinking like a hunted animal. I was thinking like a terrified girl who wanted to believe she was just being crazy. I crept to the living room window, the one that faced the main street. I didn't pull the blinds. I just stood to the side, pressing my face against the cool glass, and angled my vision down toward the sidewalk below. And that's when I saw him. The world didn't stop this time. It narrowed. It tunneled down to a single, impossible point. Down on the street, directly under the fuzzy, orange cone of a streetlight, a man was standing there. He was just a shape, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette. I couldn't see his face, it was lost in the interplay of light and shadow, but I didn't need to. His posture said everything. He wasn't walking, he wasn't waiting for a car or checking his phone. He was standing perfectly still on the empty sidewalk, head tilted up, looking directly at my window. At my apartment, at me. It wasn't a guess, it was a certainty that hit me with the force of a physical blow. There was no one else out. The street was deserted. His focus was absolute, a tangible line of energy connecting him down there to me up here. It was him, the voice, the audience, the man who owned a recording of my private life. He wasn't just some phantom in the wires, some hacker miles away. He was here, he was right outside. My heart seized. I stumbled back from the window, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. I fell backwards, landing hard on the floor with a painful thud. A gasp escaped my lips, loud in the dead quiet of the room. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, crab walking away from the window, my eyes wide with terror. He saw me. Did he see me? Did he hear that? Is he coming up? The questions hammered at me, each one another nail in the coffin of my sanity. My back hit the sofa. I huddled behind it, making myself as small as possible, my arms wrapped around my knees. I was shaking uncontrollably now, my teeth chattering. I tried to think, what do I do? What is the procedure for this? You call the police. But my phone was in pieces on my bedroom floor. My landline? I didn't have a landline. Scream? Who would hear? And what would I say? There's a man standing on the street. It sounded pathetic. It sounded crazy. I had to look again. I had to. I needed to know if he was still there. Maybe he was just some random guy. Maybe it was a coincidence. My brain was desperately trying to supply a rational explanation. A life raft in this ocean of fear. A guy waiting for a late-night Uber. A neighbor who couldn't sleep. Anything but the truth. Taking a deep breath that felt like swallowing broken glass, I crawled back to the window. I didn't stand up this time. I stayed low, my cheek pressed against the floorboards, and slowly, carefully, raised my head just enough to peek over the bottom edge of the windowsill. My eyes scanned the patch of sidewalk under the streetlight. It was empty, completely, utterly empty. The pool of orange light washed over nothing but cracked pavement and a few scattered autumn leaves. He was gone, as if he had never been there at all, as if the concrete had just swallowed him whole. I scanned the entire length of the street in both directions. Nothing, no running figure, no car pulling away. He had simply vanished into the night. A wave of dizzying vertigo washed over me. Did I imagine him? Was the stress, the grief, the terrifying phone call, was it all finally making me hallucinate? Was I losing my mind? The thought was, in its own way, almost as scary as the man himself. To be trapped not just in an apartment, but in a mind that was starting to betray you. For a moment, a wave of hysterical relief fought against the tide of fear. I imagined him. Of course I did. It was a projection of my terror. A waking nightmare. It had to be. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling. I was breathing again, albeit in ragged, shallow bursts. I backed away from the window, keeping my eyes fixed on the empty street, and retreated toward the relative safety of the hallway. It was just a panic attack. A severe, terrifying panic attack. That's what I would tell myself. I would reassemble my phone, plug the internet back in, and pretend this entire night never happened. I would be normal again. I turned away from the window, my back to the street. My gaze fell on my laptop, which was sitting closed on the small dining table. I had left it there after work, not even bothering to put it away. I'd disconnected it from the world. It was nothing more than a cold, inert piece of plastic and metal. And then its screen lit up. From its closed position, a soft, white glow seeped out from the seams. It was the unmistakable light of an active display. It pulsed once, a silent notification in the darkroom. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. I had pulled the plug. I had ripped out the cable. There was no Wi-Fi. My apartment was a digital black hole. It was impossible. My feet felt rooted to the floor. I couldn't move. I could only stare at that slender line of light, a terrifying crack in the fabric of reality. It was a signal from somewhere I couldn't comprehend, operating on rules I didn't know existed. Slowly, as if in a trance, I walked to the table. My hand trembled as I reached out and lifted the screen. The desktop background, a serene picture of a beach, was illuminated. And in the center of the screen was a single, stark white notification box. It was a new email. It showed the sender's address, a meaningless jumble of letters and numbers. And it showed the subject line. Just 3 words. 3 words that stopped my heart cold. I am listening. My body refused to move. It's a strange thing, true paralysis. Not the indecisive kind, but the kind where your brain is sending frantic messages down your spine. Move, run, hide, and your limbs are just gone. They don't exist. I was a consciousness trapped in a useless shell of meat and bone, staring at the thin, white line of light bleeding from my closed laptop. It was impossible. You have to understand that. It wasn't just improbable, it was fundamentally wrong, like seeing the sun rise in the west. I had pulled the main power cord for the router clear out of the wall socket. I had ripped the Ethernet cable from its jack. There was no Wi-Fi. There was no internet. This apartment was a Faraday cage I had built myself. And yet, there it was. A signal from nowhere, a light in the digital void. The man on the street, the vanishing act. That could have been a hallucination. My mind, frayed by grief and fear, could have conjured him from the shadows. I was desperately clinging to that possibility, that I was just losing my mind. But the light from the laptop was real. It was a solid, undeniable fact in the middle of my living room. And it meant that I wasn't the one who was crazy. The world was. Slowly, like an old woman with aching joints, I forced my legs to move. One foot in front of the other. The floorboards felt cold and sticky beneath my bare feet. Every step was an argument with myself. Don't look. Don't open it. Just grab the whole thing and throw it off the balcony. End this now. But I couldn't. It's the same morbid curiosity that makes you slow down to look at a car crash. You don't want to see it, but you have to. You have to know. I reached the small dining table. My own reflection was a distorted, pale mask on the laptop's glossy black cover. I placed my trembling hands on it. The plastic was cold. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning in my lungs, and I lifted the screen. The display flared to life, momentarily blinding me. My serene beach wallpaper seemed to mock me. And there, sitting in the middle of it, was the email notification. It was from an address that was just a chaotic scramble of letters and numbers, something no human would ever create. And the subject line, those 3 words were carved into my vision with a hot knife. I am listening. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, just stopped. For a full second, there was nothing. No beat, no air, just the silent, roaring finality of those words. He hadn't been listening to my phone calls through some clever remote hack. He wasn't some distant, disembodied phantom. The man under the streetlight wasn't a coincidence. He had seen me. He had gotten inside. The thought was so huge, so monstrous, I couldn't fully process it. My mind just rejected it, like a body rejecting a transplanted organ. I double-clicked the email. My hand was moving on its own now. I was just a passenger. The email opened. There was no text, no message, no taunts, just a single attachment, one file, living_room.mp3. I stared at the name. Living room, my living room, this room, the room I was standing in right now. The casual, clinical normality of the file name was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. It wasn't angry, it was just a label, a piece of collected data. This is a recording from the living room. File it away. My gaze drifted from the screen, scanning the space around me. The familiar armchair, the lumpy sofa I'd inherited from my last apartment, the bookshelf with its leaning tower of paperbacks, the cheap rug. It was my home, my sanctuary, but now, seeing that file name, it was all tainted. The entire room felt like a crime scene where the crime was still in progress. Every object was now a potential hiding spot. Was it in the smoke detector? The carbon monoxide alarm? Taped under the sofa? Behind a picture frame? The air I was breathing felt thick and used, as if he was sharing it with me. I had to know what was on the file. The logical part of me, the small, sane part that was screaming from a locked room deep inside my mind, told me to stop. To close the laptop, walk out of the apartment, and never come back. But I couldn't. I had to know what he had heard. I had to know what he knew. My eyes fell on the pair of cheap earbuds I used for running, tangled in a dish on the table. The thought of playing this sound out loud, of letting him know I was listening to his trophy, was unbearable. It had to be private, a secret between me and him. I clumsily untangled the white cords, my fingers feeling like fat, useless sausages. I plugged the jack into the laptop. The click it made was deafeningly loud in the dead quiet. I put the buds in my ears, the cold plastic sending a shiver through me. My mouse cursor hovered over the play icon. It was a tiny triangle pointing right, an arrow showing me the way forward into this nightmare. I closed my eyes, and I clicked. For a second, there was only the faint, electronic hiss of an open audio channel. And then, a sound began. It was a sound I knew all too well. It was the sound of me, sobbing. Not just crying. It was the ugly, broken, gasping kind of sob that comes from the deepest pit of your soul. The kind you only let out when you think you are completely and utterly alone. The audio quality was sickeningly perfect. It wasn't a distant, muffled recording. It was high fidelity. I could hear the wet catch in my own throat, the hitch in my breath between sobs. It was so clear it felt like the microphone was right next to my head. And then, another voice. My mother's voice. Faint, slightly tinny, the way it sounds over a speakerphone. It's okay, sweetie. It's okay to be sad. Just let it all out. My blood ran cold. The memories slammed into me with the force of a physical impact. It was from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. I had been having a particularly bad day. The grief over my grandmother's death had suddenly come crashing back down on me, a suffocating wave. I'd called my mom, put her on speaker, and just collapsed on the sofa, right where that armchair is now, and I cried for almost an hour while she talked me through it. It was one of the most private, vulnerable moments of my entire life. A moment shared only with my mother. And with him. The recording continued. I was a prisoner, forced to listen. I heard my own choked voice say, I just miss her so much. I keep expecting her to call. I heard the distinctive sound of my favorite ceramic mug, the heavy one, being placed on the wooden coffee table. Clink. I remembered that exact moment. I had taken a sip of water. I heard the rustle of the corduroy pillows as I shifted on the sofa, pulling my knees up to my chest. I heard my mom's voice again, trying to soothe me. I know, baby. I know. We all do. This wasn't a hack. This wasn't someone listening through the phone lines. The phone had been on speaker, in the middle of the room. To capture my voice with this clarity, to pick up the sound of a mug being set on a table from across the room, the microphone had to be in here. It had been in here for at least 2 weeks. He had been listening to everything. Every phone call, every time I talked to myself, every sigh, every time I watched TV. Every private, quiet, lonely moment had been a performance for an audience of one. The sanctuary wasn't a sanctuary. It was a stage. My entire body convulsed. I ripped the earbuds out, my nails scraping against my own skin. They fell to the table with a plastic clatter. The ensuing silence was heavier, more profound than any I had ever experienced. It was the silence of a tomb. The realization washed over me in a freezing, nauseating wave. It rewrote my entire reality. He had been in my apartment. He had walked through my rooms, touched my things, and planted his poison while I was at work, or at the grocery store. He had stood right here, where I was standing now. He knew the layout of my home better than some of my friends. He knew which sofa pillow I liked, which mug was my favorite. He knew the sound of my grief. The violation was absolute. It was a spiritual acid, dissolving everything I thought was safe, everything I thought was mine. My home wasn't my home. It was his listening post. And then the final, chilling thought landed, a block of ice in my gut. He had been in here to plant the devices. How did I know he had ever left? My head snapped up, my breath caught in my throat. My eyes, wide with a new and ultimate terror, darted wildly around the living room. It was no longer a collection of innocent objects. It was a landscape of potential hiding spots. Not for a tiny microphone anymore, but for him, the deep shadows behind the armchair, the narrow gap between the bookshelf and the wall, the dark, yawning mouth of the hallway that led to my bedroom and the closets. The space under the dining table. He had vanished from the street so quickly, so impossibly. It wasn't magic. He hadn't been swallowed by the concrete. He was already inside. The man wasn't under the streetlight to let me know he was watching. He was under the streetlight waiting to see if I had figured out where he really was. My blood went thick and cold, like sludge. My lungs forgot how to work. That last thought, he was waiting to see if I had figured out where he really was, wasn't a thought at all. It was a certainty, a fact that landed in my brain with the physical weight of a brick. The air in the room, my own small apartment, suddenly felt alien. It was his air now. I was breathing his air. For a long second, maybe 10, I was just a statue. A bug pinned to a board. My eyes were locked on the dark hallway leading to my bedroom, a black rectangle of pure possibility. Every horror movie trope I'd ever scoffed at flooded my mind. Don't go in the basement. Don't check out the strange noise. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, contained in 3 small rooms, and there was nowhere else to go. The front door felt a million miles away, and what if he was standing right behind it? Then something shifted. I guess it's the animal part of your brain taking over when the thinking part just shuts down. A single, clear instruction cut through the panic. Weapon. I needed a weapon, not my car keys held between my fingers. Not a heavy book. I needed something that could end a fight. My feet, still bare, finally unstuck from the floorboards. The movement was slow, deliberate, like I was wading through deep water. I didn't turn my back on the hallway. Not for a second. I shuffled sideways, my eyes still fixed on that square of darkness. One hand held out behind me to feel for the edge of the dining table. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the laptop, then the tangled plastic of the earbuds. Keep moving. One step, another. The kitchen archway was to my left. Every sound was magnified 100 times. The whisper of my own feet on the cheap laminate flooring sounded like sandpaper. The frantic, shallow puffing of my own breath sounded like a bellows. I expected a hand to clamp down on my shoulder with every inch I moved. I expected a shape to lurch out of the shadows. But there was nothing, just the crushing, heavy silence. I backed into the kitchen. The faint glow from the living room cast long, distorted shadows of the countertops and the refrigerator. My hand slid along the counter, searching. My knuckles bumped against the knife block. Thank God. My fingers, clumsy and shaking, fumbled around the wooden handles. There was the small paring knife, the serrated bread knife, and then the big one. The chef's knife. It was heavy, solid. I'd used it a couple of times to chop vegetables and always felt it was too big, too much. Now, it felt too small. I gripped the handle so tight my knuckles turned white. The cold steel felt real. It was a solid piece of reality in this nightmare that had swallowed my world. The plan, if you can call it that, was simple. I had to know. I had to know if I was truly alone. I had to check the bedroom. And the only way to do that was to walk straight towards the thing I feared the most. With the knife held low at my side, I moved out of the kitchen, back into the living room. It's funny, the things you think about. I remember worrying about tripping on the edge of the rug, as if that was the greatest danger I faced right now. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panicked rhythm. I took a breath, held it, and stepped into the mouth of the hallway. It was so dark, I pressed myself against the wall, using it to guide me. The paint felt cool and slick under my trembling fingertips. The bathroom door was on my left, slightly ajar. I froze, listening. Did he go in there? I nudged the door with the toe of my foot. It swung inward with a soft whine, revealing the small, empty room. The shower curtain was pulled back. No one was there. Okay, one room down. That left the bedroom. The door was wide open at the end of the hall. It was like a gaping maw. I took another step, then another. My whole body was coiled like a spring. Every muscle screamed. I was at the threshold now, peering into the gloom. The moonlight filtering through the blinds cut the room into stripes of silver and black. The rumpled sheets on my bed, the pile of clothes on a chair, the tall, dark shape of my dresser, and the closet. The closet door was shut. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just listening. Listening for a breath, for a shift in weight, for the creak of a floorboard. Nothing, just the faint hum of the city outside and the blood roaring in my own ears. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he had left. Maybe he planted the devices and was miles away now, just enjoying his sick game remotely. The thought was a tiny, fragile slice meal of hope. I was about to step back, to retreat to the living room and try to make sense of things, when a light flicked on behind me. I spun around, the knife coming up in a reflexive arc. My heart seized, but there was no one there. The light was coming from the dining table. It was my phone, which I was 100% certain I had powered off completely after the strange call from my own number. The screen was on, bright and sterile in the dim apartment. Slowly, like a bomb disposal expert, I walked back towards it. My own reflection was a pale, terrified ghost on the screen. And there, on the locked display, was a new message notification. I didn't need to unlock it to read it. The preview was right there. It was from the contact named I. The message was 5 words. Hide and seek is fun. At the exact same instant, and I mean the exact same instant, so perfectly timed it could only have been deliberate, a sound came from the bedroom behind me. It wasn't loud. It was a tiny, almost insignificant sound. It was the sound of old wood groaning under a tiny bit of pressure. A soft, drawn-out creak. It came from the closet. I didn't scream. I couldn't. It was like all the air had been vacuumed out of my lungs, out of the entire world. I just stood there, completely frozen, a puppet with its strings cut. My head turned, a slow, robotic movement, back towards the bedroom doorway. The stripes of moonlight were still there, the rumpled bed, the chair, but something was different. The closet door, which had been perfectly shut just a moment ago, was now open. Just a crack, a sliver of absolute blackness in the dim room. And it was widening. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The door opened with an agonizing slowness, not making another sound. It was a silent, deliberate reveal. A curtain being drawn on the final act. A figure detached itself from the shadows within. A man. He was tall, and he ducked his head slightly as he stepped out into the room. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't some slasher movie monster. He just looked like a guy. A guy you might see at the hardware store, or in line for coffee. And that was so much worse. He took a step forward, into a stripe of moonlight. In one hand, he was holding a strange little electronic device, all antennas and blinking lights. I recognized it from a TV show I'd seen. A bug sweeper, a frequency detector. He must have been using it to see if I'd found any of his toys. He didn't run at me. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, about 20 feet away, and he looked at me. Then, a small, knowing smile touched his lips. It was the most horrifying expression I have ever seen. It wasn't angry or lustful. It was a smile of satisfaction, of a job well done, of a collector admiring his prize specimen. He raised his other hand. In it, he was holding his own smartphone. He tilted the screen towards me. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It was a video, a live video feed. The angle was from above, looking down. I could see the top of my own head, my messy brown hair. I could see my white-knuckled grip on the chef's knife. I could see my own face, pale and slack-jawed with utter disbelief and terror. The quality was crystal clear. My gaze, moving on its own, drifted upwards from his phone screen, up towards the ceiling of my own living room. Right above my head, to the unassuming little white plastic disc screwed into the ceiling. The smoke detector. He had been watching me. Right now, the whole time, he watched me back into the kitchen. He watched me grab the knife. He watched me creep down the hall. He had a god's eye view of his own sick little maze. He lowered his phone, his eyes never leaving mine. The smile remained, calm and casual. His voice, when it came, was unremarkable. Quiet, almost friendly. It was the last voice I ever wanted to hear. "Hello, Anne," he said, as if we were being introduced at a party. "It's nice to finally meet you." For a second, maybe two, my brain just went offline. It was like a computer that had been given an impossible command and just blue-screened. My legs were locked, the knife in my hand felt like a foreign object, and his words, "It's nice to finally meet you," just echoed in the dead air. They didn't even sound menacing. That was the worst part. He said it like we were coworkers finally meeting in the break room after months of emailing. Calm, casual, there was no monster logic here. No creature was going to lurch at me. This was a man who had been in my closet, who had watched me on a hidden camera, who smiled like he'd just solved a pleasant little puzzle. The normalcy of it was what broke me. The human brain can process a monster, it has a file for that. It doesn't have a file for this. Then, through the static, a single, primal signal got through. It wasn't a thought, it was an impulse, pure animal instinct screaming from the bottom of my brainstem. It just said, "Wrong. Everything is wrong. Do something." My eyes, which had been glued to his face, darted to the side. To my right, on the small end table next to the sofa, was a heavy ceramic lamp my grandma had given me. A solid, ugly thing with a weighted base. It was the closest thing to me that wasn't a part of me. I didn't aim. I didn't plan. One moment I was frozen, the next my body was in motion. I dropped the useless knife. It clattered loudly on the laminate floor, and my hand shot out, grabbing the lamp by its neck. With a guttural sound that I didn't recognize as my own, I swung my entire body and just chucked it at him. It flew through the air in a clumsy, wobbling arc. He was so surprised, so confident in his control of the situation, that he didn't even move to dodge it. He just sort of flinched. The heavy base caught him square on the shoulder with a sickening, wet thud. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, and staggered back a step, his left arm going limp. The hand holding his phone dropped, and the device clattered to the floor. The little screen, still showing the God's eye view of my living room, went black. That was my chance. It was the only one I was going to get. The front door was a straight line past him. No way. He was between me and it. But to my left, past the dining table, was the sliding glass door to my tiny third-floor balcony. It wasn't an exit. It was a cage with a view. But it was the only other direction to go. I ran. My bare feet slapped against the floor, and I remember shoving the dining chair so hard it screeched and toppled over. The sound was like an alarm bell. Behind me, I heard him curse, a low, angry sound. The casual act was over. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hand found the flimsy lock on the sliding door. My fingers were slick with sweat, fumbling. For a horrible second, it wouldn't budge. "Come on, come on, come on," my brain chanted. Then, with a click, it gave way. I yanked the door open, it rattled in its cheap aluminum track, and stumbled out into the cold night air. The balcony was tiny, maybe 4 feet deep. The metal railing was ice cold under my hands. 3 stories down, the concrete sidewalk looked impossibly far. I was trapped. It was over. I could hear him moving in the apartment behind me. Then I saw it. Directly below my balcony was the retractable fabric awning of the coffee shop on the ground floor. It was extended, a dark blue rectangle in the orange glow of the streetlights. It wasn't ground level, but it wasn't the concrete sidewalk. There was no choice. To stay was to die. I knew that with a certainty that went deeper than thought. I swung one leg over the railing, my jeans catching for a second on the metal. I heard the sliding door behind me rattle again as he came out onto the balcony. I didn't look. I couldn't lose the momentum. I scrambled, clumsy and terrified, getting my other leg over. For a half second, I was just perched there, straddling the railing 3 floors up, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Then I let go. I fell. It was only for a second, but it felt like an hour. There was that weightless, stomach-lurching feeling, and then an explosive whump as I hit the awning. The fabric stretched, groaned, and I heard the sound of stitching popping. It held, but it launched me sideways like a faulty trampoline. I tumbled off the edge and landed in a heap in the grimy alley beside the shop. A bolt of pure, white-hot fire shot up my left leg. I heard a sound, a dry snap, and knew immediately that something was very wrong. But the pain was good. The pain was real. It meant I was alive. I was out. I pushed myself up on my elbows, my head spinning. I looked up. His silhouette was there, on my balcony, looking down at me. We made eye contact for a second across the 30 feet of air. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was annoyance, like I just ruined his favorite show. Then a light flickered on in the apartment window next to mine. A dog started barking somewhere. A man's voice yelled, "What the hell was that?" The silhouette on my balcony hesitated, then vanished back inside. That's when I started screaming. I just lay there on the filthy asphalt with a broken ankle and screamed my lungs out. The next couple of hours were a blur of flashing lights and muffled voices. Paramedics, police officers, the concerned faces of my neighbors peering down at me. They cut my jeans off in the ambulance to get at my ankle, which had already swollen to the size of a grapefruit. At the hospital, a kind, tired-looking doctor told me it was a clean break in the tibia. They put me in a cast and gave me painkillers that made the world feel fuzzy and distant, which was a blessing. I talked to the first responding officers, told them everything. The phone, the calls, the email, the man in the closet. I'm pretty sure I sounded crazy, but they must have believed some of it, because they sealed off my apartment as a crime scene. It was 2 days later that I went to the station. I was on crutches, feeling shaky and disgusting. They put me in a small, windowless room with a metal table. A detective came in. She was maybe in her 40s, with a no-nonsense look but kind eyes. Her name was Miller, and, she said, sitting down across from me, "First, I'm glad you're okay. What you did was incredibly brave." I just nodded, not feeling brave at all. "We did a full sweep of your apartment," she continued, opening a file. "You weren't crazy. It was worse than you thought." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list. Living room, 1 micro camera, mic combo, model RX55, installed in smoke detector. Kitchen, 1 audio-only bug, model T12, wired into the back of the GFCI outlet. Hallway, 1 motion-activated camera, pinhole lens, drilled into doorframe. Bedroom, 1 micro camera, mic combo, model RX55, installed in smoke detector. Bathroom, 1 waterproof audio-only bug, model A9, sealed with silicone inside the shower head. I stared at the list. My vision started to swim. The shower head. He'd listened to me in the shower. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from passing out. My safe space, my home, had been a soundstage. A fishbowl. "We also analyzed the old phone you found," Detective Miller said, her voice soft. She could see I was falling apart. She pushed a clear plastic evidence bag towards me. Inside was my grandma's old, simple phone. The tech guys pulled everything off the internal memory. Not much on it. It was mostly wiped, but there was one thing. A photo. It was deleted, but we recovered it. She slid a printed copy of the photo across the table. It was blurry, obviously taken by someone unused to a camera phone. It showed the side of a building, a red brick building with a blue awning. The coffee shop, my building. I looked at the timestamp data printed at the bottom of the page. It was taken 1 week before I signed my lease. 2 weeks before I moved in. I looked up at her, confused. "What? I don't understand." "Your grandmother took this picture," Miller said, her gaze steady. "We think she came by to check out the place for you, before you moved in. Make sure the neighborhood was safe." The irony was a physical blow. I could picture her perfectly, standing across the street, snapping a quick, clumsy photo to send to my mom, to show her where her granddaughter was going to live. "And," the detective said, leaning forward slightly, "we think our guy, the man in your apartment, had already been targeting this unit. Before you were even in the picture. He may have been in there setting up his equipment, thinking it was empty. And your grandmother, she might have seen him, or seen a ladder, or just noticed a door that should have been locked was ajar. She might have just interrupted him." The blood drained from my face. The room felt cold, the air thin. I knew what she was going to say before she said it, but I needed to hear the words. "We're reopening the investigation into your grandmother's death," she said, and her voice was filled with a gentle pity that was almost worse than the truth itself. "We no longer believe it was an accidental fall." I just sat there. The sterile, quiet room seemed to fall away. My mind latched onto a single, horrifying detail. The phone he left behind. With the single contact, it wasn't a ghostly message. It wasn't some supernatural warning. It was a trophy, a sick, twisted souvenir from his first victim in that apartment, left for his next one to find. A way to start the game all over again. I finally found my voice. It was a whisper. "So, he wasn't after me?" Detective Miller's kind eyes held a universe of grim reality. She shook her head slowly. The two final sentences she spoke would shatter my world more completely than any man in a closet ever could. He wasn't stalking you because you're in, she said. He was stalking the apartment. You were just the one who moved in next. I sat there, on my crutches, in the police station, a survivor. But I didn't feel like one. I felt like a footnote. A random character who had stumbled into the last act of someone else's horror movie. A movie that was still playing. He was still out there, and my old apartment, my first home, was just waiting patiently for the next tenant. Waiting for the show to begin again.